Welcome everybody. We're just gonna give it a few seconds so that people can join us. Okay. So you're joining us for the Lessons from the Gippsland Community eBus pilot today, run by iMove. I'm just going to play a little video for you at the beginning while we're waiting for people to join, which I hope you enjoy. It's one of a series of videos that we produced, just a short one, not the longer version, but you can watch the other ones actually on our website, and it's completely worth doing that because they've been excellently produced. So I will just play that for you now.
My name is Ada Patestas. I come here on Venus Bay 25 years. The last 6 years, I'm living permit here. I have depression and here it relax you. It's beautiful, but they don't have a transport. And they have a community center here, they have a bus. The first I can say the truth, I don't believe it. And then she say, yes, we have a bus. And then I say, oh, my wings are fly again. And true, I fly again. And I love what they're doing. And I hope never stop. I love it. That's it.
And thank you to Ada for allowing us to feature her on the video. I'm not sure she knew she was going to star in the webinar as well, but I think it's a beautiful piece of work. So we've just seen those beautiful lands over there in Venus Bay. So I'd also like to begin this webinar by acknowledging the traditional owners of all the lands from which we're meeting today, and also I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past and present of those lands. So it's been an absolute privilege to work on this project. My name is Jacqueline King. I'm Head of Communications at iMove. I got to work with the team on the videos, but not just that, be part of the steering committee throughout. And I've got to see, the hard work and the outcomes that have come from this project. So I'm thrilled to have a bunch of people with you today who are going to be able to deliver some insights on how the projects went, what we can learn from that, and I'm sure be able to make themselves available to you post this event if there's any questions or if you need any assistance looking at how to do this yourself. But the project would not have been possible without support from our partners. And I'd first of all like to acknowledge the Department of Transport and Planning in Victoria, who provided funding for the buses originally, which obviously the seed funding enabled us to even think about doing the project, and then supported throughout with funding for the project and also on the steering committee. So a big shout out to Nathaniel Wills, who was on the steering committee and offered some fantastic guidance, who I think is here today. To tell us a little bit more about the genesis and how this all came about, then I would like to introduce you to Richard Milne, who is the Manager, Regional Coordination, Intergovernmental Relations at the Department of Transport. And Richard, you're going to say a few words about the options available to regional communities and what the Victorian DTP does for them. Over to you.
Thanks, Jackie. So I oversee a program called the Flexible Local Transport Solutions Program. It's a program that works, I guess, with councils and not-for-profits to deliver local transport initiatives. And since 2017, we've funded over 200 projects and about $14 million worth of investment. Typically, we do about 30 projects a year and across a number of areas, including community transport. Next slide. Yep. So the program has got sort of 5 key areas where we support projects. The first is in, I guess, capital works projects, and that allows us to do, I guess, things like missing link footpaths. You can go to the next slide. Missing link footpaths, and these are about, I guess, providing integrated connections in communities. It's about safety. The second area is around sort of transport planning, and this is things like evidence-based freight studies and local transport plans. It also is there to drive reform and innovation, and some of the things that we do in that space are booking systems, demand responsive trials. And the area that obviously we're here today about is about promoting inclusion in remote and disadvantaged communities, and facilitating local transport options to better connect people with amenities, schools, employment, essential services. And that's things like community buses and transport service trials. And the other area that we've been doing of recent is recognising, respecting and celebrating Aboriginal culture and heritage on local transport projects in partnership with Victorian traditional owners. And this is things like interpretive signage on walkways and things like that. Next slide. So we have had quite a bit of investment over the last 8 years in community transport initiatives, and over $5 million has been invested over 73 small-scale community transport projects. And these typically included things like transport directories, community transport research, community transport planning, many transport clients, including to access employment, and in this case, the one we're going to hear about today, having to establish new community transport services. But also we invest in existing services to improve technologies, which helps with sustainability, such as booking systems, and sometimes new vehicles. Next slide. So when we look to partner with communities, we look for a number of factors and discuss in discussions with the community groups just to see whether or not we've got a project that's going to be viable. And the first is the ability for the proponent to actually contribute to the project. The second is around whether there's actually a demonstrated need and the expected benefits. And quite importantly, one of the challenges with community transport, as you're going to hear about today, is it's very reliant on volunteers. So it's important that if we're going to look to support a new initiative in a community, that there's a pool of available volunteers to support the service. And then if we're going to invest in a vehicle, we want to know that the vehicle is going to be used post the project. So operating costs, it's important that the proponent's got the ability to do some fundraising and cover those costs. And another important factor we discuss with them is accreditation. There are some requirements if you're going to be transporting school-age children. So look, that's a bit of a nutshell of the program. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Harvey Donnelly, the Gippsland region, to tell you a bit more about some examples.
Thanks, Richard. I'd just like to quickly introduce Harvey Donnelly, who's the Director of Regional Operations in Gippsland, Planning and Development. And Harvey also appeared at our recent event celebrating the project in Gippsland. So Harvey, over to you to say a few words.
No worries. Thanks, Jackie. And I suppose I'm lucky because while Richard oversees the project on a statewide basis, I'm actually here in Gippsland, and myself and my team are able to actually work with communities and groups to actually deliver some of these. And as Richard said, it's a broad program and we deliver all of those things. But we're here today to talk about community buses and the benefits they bring. And it'd be remiss to not start off, of course, with the trial that we're talking about. And I mean, these buses and volunteers have really provided new transport connections across South Gippsland. But it's not only just connecting people safely and easily to where they need to go. As we'll see as we go through this, it's also about bringing communities together, and that gives real benefits. And as we saw right from the very start, they're electric vehicles, and these are a first for community buses in Victoria. So the Sandy Point and Venus Bay community should be really proud of themselves for providing this opportunity to test out this innovation. So that's fantastic. It's been going for 2 years, but there's been community members through their persistence over a lot longer period of time that have brought this to fruition. And we shouldn't forget the efforts that they got and the probably vision they had for this. That's really fantastic. As I said, and we're going to talk a lot about volunteers, but the buses wouldn't run without volunteer drivers, booking officers, and the community support. And that we've seen come through so much down at Sandy Point and Venus Bay. It's been fantastic. And it's been fantastic in this case too to be able to collaborate with the research partners, because we're going to take away, as we'll go through the webinar, we will find there are a lot of learnings we can take away and put around in other areas. Now, I've got a couple of other slides because we have provided community buses in a number of areas across Gippsland, from East Gippsland, South Gippsland, Bass Coast. All of them are different models. No two are the same. And they often serve different needs. We've got one in Merbau North that's particularly has done some great work around getting students to vet courses and tapes and those sorts of things, where they really wouldn't have been able to get there if it hadn't been for some sort of transport like this, if you've got parents at work and so forth. So they have a bit of a different model. They also take students to sporting events and so forth. And they even, manage to take people to social events on the weekend, so they can get there safely and get back in areas where there's no taxis, there's no rideshare, there's none of that sort of stuff. They're a different model. They're not an electric vehicle at the moment, but they certainly have been funded through this program. Another one that we're really excited on is the Benambra Community Bus. Now, if people know Benambra, it's right up in the high country in East Gippsland, and connections and up there are extremely difficult. And in this case up there, a lot of the connection is back to bus lines. So they can actually connect to other public transport to be able to get to where they need to go to, get to even just things like appointments, and particularly when they rely on places like Omeo or Bensdale to get medical, or those higher order services. So we're looking really forward to that one coming on board. And I should say too, it also supports things like football clubs and netball clubs, as a lot of these do, which gives communities an opportunity to get to those events that they may not get to. So there's some of the ones we've done. Just going back over the benefits of the whole thing. I've put some benefits here, but even after I put these down, I thought of more. But I'll just go through. I mean, it provides opportunities, community buses, where public transport's just never going to be put in place. It's never going to work and wouldn't work because it's not on demand and it doesn't suit the sorts of needs that we have. It's just not a feasible model. So it certainly helps those communities. It provides communities with an opportunity to work together to shape it to how they need it. As I say, one model doesn't fit everything here, but all of our combined experiences, we can sort of look at anything that's needed. Volunteers are the key, and they get great benefits out of it too. And I've talked to a lot of volunteers, and I even heard when we were down in Sandy Point and Venus Bay celebrating the 2-year trial, some of the great things that the volunteers get out of it. So it's not just about the volunteering and the doing the work, but it's also the real sense that they get back. It supports, obviously, social inclusion, bringing the communities together, and we heard that at the start. The way we work is we provide seed funding for these services. We don't fund them ongoing, but we've found in all of the cases that I've mentioned so far, and a lot of others I haven't mentioned, that they become sustainable, and they, through donations, through, gold coin donations, or through hiring, or whatever the model they find to suit us. So they become sustainable. And as I was reminded after I put this slide together, one of the other great things is about road safety, because in this particular instance, a lot of instances with these community buses, as I said, they're used for things like taking elderly to events or to various areas, and so they don't feel forced to drive, and certainly taking people to events where they might have risked drinking and driving. So there's a number of ways that they provide road safety, and I think if we sat around for a while longer, we could think of a lot more benefits. But certainly from DTP's perspective and from mine, we've been really proud to be involved in these projects and hope to be able to do a lot more in the future. Thanks, Jackie. That's me.
Thanks, Harvey. That's great. I'm going to introduce you to some fairly special people in a moment who have made all of this happen. We got lots of special people involved in these projects. Before I do that, I just want to let you know, so I can see someone's found it already, so well done. But there is a Q&A at the bottom of the screen there, the function to submit your questions as we go throughout. So we don't just want to talk at you for the next hour. We'd much prefer it if you gave us some questions as we go along, and that includes for the communities, for our government representatives, and also we'll have a presentation at the end of the community one from our researchers at La Trobe. So you can put questions in the Q&A whenever you like, and as we go through the different sections of the webinar, it would be a good time to ask them about that specific section. So just a word on how we've structured the webinar. Rather than have two separate presentations from each community, we've decided to tackle it as in which bits of the projects combine them to actually deliver insights around the operations, around electric vehicles and the different elements of the projects, which hopefully will make it easier and more meaningful to you. You can ask questions as we go through that. So please get them coming through. I'll come back to the one that's already in the Q&A. It's a good question, and yes, we do, and we will respond to that shortly. So now, our community members who we've got with us today, I'm delighted to introduce Alison Skinner from the Venus Bay Community Centre. Alison has worked night and day to make this happen, along with other things, and has got some fantastic insights. Frank Shriver from Sandy Point, and Phil Cornwell and Neil Shaw, also from Sandy Point. You're going to get quite a variety of views here, because you've got people that are driving the bus, that are taking bookings, that are managing the process and doing the promotions. So I think, Alison, you just do all of that. But anyway, with no more delay, we will move on to the insights from the community and have a look at how you can get started with a similar project. So guys, I would love to hand over to you. I think in the first instance, Frank, you were going to start the process and take us through the slide with support from other Sandy Point people, and then Alison will interject with the Venus Bay perspectives as well. Does that sound okay?
Sounds good.
Awesome. So
Okay.
business model.
Yeah. So first bullet point there. So first of all, a huge vote of thanks to DEP, iMove and La Trobe Uni for the enormous assistance we had. It's not as simple as I originally thought. Just get a bus and start driving it. It's way more involved than that, and we had enormous support from those three bodies in helping us get this going, not only the funding in the first place, but also ongoing support. So thanks very much. In our case, this is a different model from Venus Bay, but we had to set up a brand new entity, the Sandy Point Bus Management Committee. I'm sure any other community could think of a much simpler name than that. I encourage you to do so. We've reduced it to SPBMC. And it was set up as a not-for-profit model with Consumer Affairs Victoria. Relatively simple process to do that, and you adopt the model rules and you prepare annual financial reports. It's relatively straightforward. And we structured a local committee on top of that that involves people who are doing the bookings, who are driving, who are doing the treasury functions, for instance, and other things. So a committee of about 5 people. Next bullet point. Of course, that involves setting up bank accounts with 2 signatories to cover any expenses. And along the way, we've set up a term deposit system as well, because we have a donations model. We recommend a donation for every trip, and we've got a donations calculator, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but that became necessary to work out a reasonable donation to cover our costs for whatever the trip was. And along the way, over 2 years, we've been able to build up a reasonable nest egg to support the bus and put some money aside for what we'd call the bus replacement fund. So anticipating replacing this bus in 8 to 10 years, for instance. So we want to try and put some money aside and at least have some of our own funds to commit to that rather than just asking for a grant for the whole amount. Next point. We also set up a website that became very necessary, obviously, to do that and to include a booking function on the website. We're very lucky to have had a person in Sandy Point who volunteered her time to do this, who knew the ins and outs of the software to set up a relatively detailed website with booking functions. So people can phone in. Typically, they'd go to the website and make a booking, put in a time slot and so on, or they might phone up, and the booking manager, the booking officer, has access to that mobile phone. So it does require at least an asset of a mobile phone to be acquired. All of our other IT is privately owned at this point in time. Next point. Yes, as I mentioned, donations model for the trips, and our treasurer worked out a very, tremendous calculator for the on a spreadsheet for the donations. So we recommend a donation. If people can't donate, of course they can get on the bus anyway. But we started the whole business model that each trip involved a donation, and how much people should donate or recommend to be donated is determined by this calculator, and that seems to be working very well. Next slide.
I might just quickly invite Alison to. Have you got any comments there, Alison, on the Venus Bay approach? I know some of this is relevant to you and some of it not so much. But you're on mute.
Sorry. Interesting because it was a great. So both communities have got similar geographical circumstances, end of the line communities, full-time community members, part-time community members, coastal, seasonal visitation, etc. And both communities had been working on community energy projects, which is one of the reasons this has sort of started in the electric vehicle space. For us, just I'll briefly touch, we're already an organisation, the Venus Bay Community Centre. We're a not-for-profit registered charity. We're also a neighbourhood house. And so we do a whole range of activities and programs and projects for and with our community. So this slotted in, we didn't have to establish a new entity. So that part was probably easier for us at the start there. So we had all of the stuff around the bank accounts and the governance. We already had a board, etc. I just wanted to mention that at the start, as part of that 2-year trial, one of the really great things for each community was that there was an engagement officer that was provided for about 7 hours a week or something like that to assist us in different ways in each community to establish the service, to work through all the bookings, to work through all of the paperwork, all of that sort of stuff. And that was absolute gold. I think we would both agree, Frank. That was really critical for us. And just on terms of that, so the donation model, so we can't actually charge a fare because we're not a chartered bus service. We're a community transport service, both organisations. So that's why I think Frank's referring to that donation model, the suggested sort of donation. And just on the difference in community, so it's a different demographic in Venus Bay, and possibly people aren't. We offered much of our services for free at the start because it was a supported trial and we wanted to get people on it. We wanted to see how it was all working, and we have a range of sort of suggested donations, if you will, for other services. But if we charge the same kind of suggested fee as Sandy Point, I don't think we would. It's probably got a lower socioeconomic base than Sandy Point does. So it's just that difference between knowing your community. So that fare calculator is a really fabulous thing for Sandy Point, but yeah, we've sort of probably got a sliding scale. So, for example, to get into the nearest town on a scheduled trip for us, which is about I don't know, half an hour drive away, we suggest $5 because the people that we're servicing with that's what they can afford. So it's just the difference between the two different communities, and each community, as Harvey said before, every project's different. So
Thanks, Alison. I think that's some really
That
good
noise in the background bad? Me?
Can't hear it.
Okay.
Okay, so Frank, back over to you, compliance and risk.
Yeah, so can I hand over to Phil on this one? Did you want to take up this point, Phil? Yeah, hello?
I guess I can talk a little about these elements. Yes, obviously, right from the outset, we had compliance responsibilities. So we were fortunate to get some support through the backers from the project and government in determining our formal documentation policies and procedures. But to be perfectly honest, there's still works in progress. There's still quite a bit of work to be done to make sure that they actually reflect the specific needs of each community. So from others potentially wanting to go down this path, it's quite a substantial amount of work that needs to be considered. I'd like to move on to the next one. Thank you. Yes, of course. And as part of that compliance process, we have in place the relevant insurances for both the vehicle, our drivers, and of course the public liability professional indemnity insurance for our committee. Next one, please. As part of the establishment process, we created a driver register, and providing our volunteers have a valid driver license, and we require them also to get a working with children check. So our pool of volunteer drivers need to comply with both of those requirements. Next one. I think perhaps, Frank, you'd be best to deal with this next
this is a big one.
Question, the accreditation process.
Yeah, accreditation is quite an onerous process, and probably beyond most volunteer organisations to do it. We tried it a couple of times and ended up opting for exemption, and there was quite a lot of or lack of clarity around the Bus Safety Act and who we could and couldn't carry. And it turns out through exemption, we can certainly carry school-aged children, but not if they're booked by the school, only if they're travelling independently. For instance, somebody coming down to be on patrol at the Surf Lifesaving Club as a school-aged child can certainly travel on the bus, and they're booking it themselves. This is kind of a bit of a grey zone, but as long as it's not booked by an institution, it's considered okay. We had to knock back a number of schools to carry kids that they were trying to have special transport for instance, going to special classes in the Trobe Valley and so on, because it was being booked by the institution for school-related activities. So it's a bit complicated, but the accreditation process does require a lot of documentation to be updated on a regular basis, and it really is beyond, certainly our little volunteer organisation to pull it together. So that's a bit of a work in progress, actually, but the exemption does allow us to carry most people other than book through the institution itself. Anything to add to that, Phil?
Not at all. No, that's very well described. Thanks,
Alison.
Frank.
The other feature of one of these buses, which we forgot to mention at the start, was they both have wheelchair hoists.
Yes.
So we haven't transported too many people with wheelchairs, but it is another level of training to make sure that all of the straps and things are all properly there. So it's another imposition or on the volunteer driver and the management of the service. And so
yeah, well, I mean, we can carry people in wheelchairs. There's nothing that prevents us from doing that, other than if it's booked by the aged care organisation itself. We can't carry them then, but if they're booked by the person in question,
yeah,
okay.
These are all the things we wish we knew before we started, because Frank's been very kind about how long it took us to navigate that through and how much we all pulled our hair out trying to navigate. But anyway, that's the value of this project, is we've got the, accurate information now and a toolkit and the experience that we're willing to share with anyone.
Alison, I think there's a wealth of information throughout the whole webinar that people will be able to learn from, and you guys have trod that difficult path for them. So, cool. Frank, did you have any quick comments on vehicle?
And Phil might want to add to this, but we are lucky enough to have the men's shed involved in this and doing a regular check on the bus every week. And once a year we do a full bus safety check at an accredited location in Leongatha. Anything to add to that, Phil?
Well, it's all Frank. Thank you. No, that's exactly right. It's a routine. Once a week, we make sure the vehicle is given a very careful looking over.
Okay.
I'm going to talk about this one. I'm jumping.
Okay.
Alison, I know you've got a lot to say on this topic.
And I'm going to be nice.
We do need to keep things moving along because we have a lot of information.
I will say it's really, really critical, the vehicle selection. So I saw a question before about, this is the first community transport project using an electric vehicle. So we're very mindful that we were, leading the charge there. So we've learned a lot about vehicle inspections, vehicle choice rather, and in the time frame that we've been doing this project, in the inception was probably like 3 years ago, there was limited choices of vehicles that would be suitable, but we certainly made some mistakes, and I would suggest they absolutely have to have the infrastructure around. So our vehicles were only AC charging, so that has left us limited opportunities to charge. It's determined the range that we can travel on vehicles because the public infrastructure doesn't support AC charging very well. If we'd known that at the start, we would have thought about that differently. Regional roads are different to travel on. So, so I think electric vehicles are fantastic. I actually thought at the start, it's going to be free. Fuel's going to be free, if you will, because we have got solar at the community centre. We've got a battery, we've got a backup generator, similar circumstances in Sandy Point. But actually, the bus battery is gigantic. It's 80 kilowatts. So it does pull from the grid or drains the battery. So it's not a zero-sum game, but I think there's been real interest in the project because it's an electric vehicle. So as long as you choose the vehicle carefully, and things have changed in the time that we've been doing the project, I think go with electric. And it's interesting, I think these buses are going to be even more critical now that fuel prices have gone through the roof, and regional communities bear the impact of that often more, because we don't have any other options of transport. So
yeah, can I just add 2 points, Jackie? In terms of choosing internal combustion or electric, electric has much lower maintenance requirements. There's no oils or spark plugs or other things to service that you get in an internal combustion engine. So very low servicing requirements. The brakes aren't used anywhere near as much because the vehicles have what's called regenerative braking, where the motor becomes a generator basically when you take your foot off the accelerator and puts energy back into the battery and slows the vehicle down. So brakes last a lot longer and minimal maintenance requirements. So a lot of significant advantages there in terms of cost of running it.
The other thing about that is it's not only the vehicle selection, it's ensuring that there's appropriate service agents in your area. So we've struggled a little bit with that. And once again, there wasn't as much support around electric vehicles. So some people looked at it and went, "Oh, won't touch that." Oh, so that's improving all the time in regional communities, the mechanics or the service agents that are able to assist with the repairs or maintenance.
Thanks, Alison. Frank.
So seating capacity is an important thing. Our buses will seat 10 people, including the driver. That does reduce the need. I mean, there are seating requirements, seating level requirements that absolutely require accreditation or not. 10 or less is kind of an optional thing, as I discussed a bit earlier, depending on who's booking the vehicle. But our buses carry 10 people, including the driver, and we had them equipped with wheelchair lift, thinking that this is what a community would need for people who are sort of mobility challenged, who couldn't drive. We have carried people in wheelchairs probably a dozen times, Phil, over 2 years. It's not a huge number. Nevertheless, the need has been there, even though it's low. I'll hand over to you, Phil and Neil, on this one.
Right, okay. I'll make a start. Just a little bit of background about Sandy Point. It's a small coastal community. There's about 600 houses here with 300 permanent residents. A large number of those are elderly. We have a very strong history of volunteering. I did a very quick look at the nature of organisations in town. Around about 15 came to mind immediately. From one end of the spectrum, we've got people like the Surf Club and the Country Fire Authority, who have some sort of institutional support. At the other end of the spectrum, we've got groups like the Ladies Table Tennis Club and the Book Club. So a vast range of people or organisations, but very strongly supported by the volunteering ethic. At the start of the eBus project, it was as a consequence of some work, as Alison has alluded, through the renewable energy environment, and our men's shed were very supportive in allowing us to move forward. We already had solar and an EV charger available at the men's shed. So the logical place for it to start was actually at the men's shed. And in those early days, the volunteers primarily came from the men's shed, both in terms of the early administrative support and then the volunteer drivers. Maybe if we could, but in terms of actually trying to track down who we could get involved, it was really just Frank and I had participated in a number of other community organisations within Sandy Point and knew who we could potentially attract to help support the bus. And that's how we started. As we moved forward, we needed to cover off on a whole range of other aspects of the project, as well as the original administration and finance. We needed to look at how to deal with the booking process, how to promote the service, how we might increase or attract additional funding. And to do so, we've managed to increase the numbers on our committee. Frank mentioned 5. I know there are now 7 on our committee, and so we've got people with the relevant sort of background skills to address the background requirements. I was looking also at our registered driver list, and I was surprised to find that we've actually got 25 volunteer drivers actually on our register. Unfortunately, not all of those are now active participants. We've got 4 to 5 who regularly drive for us, and another 4 to 5 who are reasonable standbys. So those are really the major challenges, is to make sure that we actually, as the service has grown, we've been able to attract the additional resources to manage the service. Right, we might move on to the next one. Thanks, Jackie. And how do we keep people engaged? Well, our committee is a group of friends rather than a formal committee. So we make sure that we do get together regularly to discuss the issues of the bus itself, but we also make sure that we actually enjoy the process. So we try to combine our committee meetings with some form of socialising, a glass of wine or maybe a coffee. We also make sure that the relative roles have some authority, that they feel compensated through the whole process with their volunteered hours. So and get some form of sense of achievement from engaging in the process. We encourage people to come forward with ideas and innovative. The idea, for instance, of the booking the trip estimator was as a result of some very robust discussions about the whole donation model and how we might manage that process. So we try to keep engaged to encourage participation. From a driver's perspective, we've offered refreshers so that we get the drivers together as regularly as we can to and again make sure that it's a social occasion and not just a formality. And we encourage feedback from our drivers. We keep an active driver's log of each trip, and we ask that drivers come forward with any suggestions for improvements to the way the service could be run. Right, on a regular basis, we have a weekly report that comes as part of the financials. We keep quite a detailed track of what our trips do, so that goes out as a weekly report. And we keep in touch with our drivers and our committee through the social media, through WhatsApp. Basically, we have a duty manager WhatsApp, which allows our committee to regularly communicate. And we have an active drivers WhatsApp list so that we can communicate with our registered drivers. And we have a broader drivers list so that we can pass information out to the wider community, wider volunteer list. That's pretty much it from the process of keeping the volunteers engaged, unless Neil or Frank would like to add anything else.
Alison, did you have a comment to anything you wanted to add there?
Probably just one thing to acknowledge in smaller communities is there's so much volunteerism around everything that happens, not just this project. Like you mentioned, the Men's Shed and Surf Lifesaving Club, the response team, the community centre, So there's a huge number of, and often you'll find volunteers or community members of all different groups. So there's a real thing about volunteer fatigue, if you will. And also the people that tend to volunteer are older. They've got the time. So I don't know about Sandy Point, but a lot of our drivers are in that sort of older category. And then because we're seasonal communities, a lot of drivers go away in winter. So there's those other factors to kind of manage. We probably have done it differently than Sandy Point. They're really great at having those different roles and engagement. So we similarly contact our drivers via it's a messenger group, but and we use our social media and our newsletter to keep the community informed. So I think that's a really big part of it, to engage people's interest and curiosity, because everyone goes, oh, it's a great project, oh, it's fantastic you're doing this. And it's like, well, it takes a lot of work. Would you like to do a little bit? So having a way that people can contribute an hour of their time, occasional sort of time. So having those different sort of levels of being able to contribute, because not everyone wants to do it all the time. So
That's a really good point, Alison. I'm just mindful we've got a lot of questions coming through, and I want to make sure we do have some time for them. So I'm going to keep things moving along, and just ask the communities. Let's if we can keep this quite relatively quick, and then we can accommodate further questions at the end. So Frank, over to you.
Yeah, I'd just like to introduce Neil Shaw, who's our primary booking manager. And it's the old adage that if you want a job done, ask a busy person. I knew Neil was really busy, so I asked him to take on this job. He's done that with great enthusiasm. He's got good IT skills, tremendous IT skills, and he's taken on this task and also is training others. So over to you, Neil, just to describe the booking process quickly.
Okay, yeah, very briefly. Look, the booking officer's role is quite a critical function because it brings together the people who want a lift and the drivers who are going to deliver the service. The bookings mostly come in through the web-based system, but unfortunately we get phone calls, we get text messages, we get word of mouth requests. So anyway, basically the web-based system works pretty well. The WhatsApp, when I get a request, send out a message seeking a driver. Hopefully a driver picks up, and then the booking is confirmed, again, through the web-based system. The passenger gets an acknowledgement or confirmation, both email and text message. I personally, as a booking officer, not much involved in training the drivers, of course, or whatever, but I certainly help train any potential booking officers. I wish we had more. I say that because there are times when the booking officer, mostly myself, can't do it. I mean, if I've got a medical appointment or playing bowls or some issue, then I have to hand over to somebody else, and you have to have that somebody else. Not because of the web-based system, because that can wait, but it's the phone calls. I have to be on guard for phone calls. And the stressful part of it probably is the fact that sometimes we get really short notice jobs, and that's hard on the booking officer to find a driver quickly, and it's hard on the drivers to respond straight away. So we can have someone, for example, on the V-Line bus arriving in Fish Creek in half an hour time, and I want to lift to Sandy Point. So we managed so far, never missed one. That's amazing.
You're very accommodating.
I think actually very lucky so far anyway. All right.
Yeah, and I guess that final point is that the web-based system, our IT specialist has gone to great lengths to make sure that we have a fairly robust training manual so that we are in a position to pass on the skills. We've yet to find somebody with Neil's abilities, but we're working on that.
Yeah, well, basically last winter I had 4 or 5 months in Queensland, and during the whole of that time I was still, unfortunately, the booking officer. So it does work no matter where you are. However, I'm keen to find somebody else soon.
I think there's always a work-life balance thing to consider. Even with volunteering, it's an important thing. You know, people are giving up their time. Alison, you had something you wanted to say?
Just the web-based, the booking system was a real challenge, and that's great to have the support of La Trobe over time. And so the big ones that work in other, big corporate environments were never going to work for us. So Sandy Point's got a different kind of system than we do. We've actually gone to use a platform called Humanitics. So you can get through and you can book there, and we get all the information through that. I think your point about that human touch is really relevant. So there is some technology required to book, but many of our passengers, and Ada that you saw at the start there is one of those, just does not navigate technology. So they want to ring. They want to ring and book. So there's another, it can never be fully automated. And as you mentioned as well, that short notice. So, for tomorrow morning, no, sorry, it's a volunteer service. So I think being clear about what it is and what it isn't. It is not an Uber. For us, it is not a taxi. There's scheduled services. There's other mechanisms for the services that we provide. So it's not that.
Thanks, Alison. I think if we pop onto the promotion slide, just a couple of comments from each community about what worked.
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned, a website's essential. And promoting the bus is also essential. People have to know about it. It's not good enough to just have it. You have to know, people have to know about it and how to actually access this bus. So there's active Facebook pages in Sandy Point. We have a very great newsletter, also put together by the same person who did our website. We've got a reasonably large subscriber list that we email to. We put posters around. We've got a dynamic sign which we're still trialing in our local shop, which just advertises the bus. And through DTP, we're also able to put up signs at the local V-Line bus stop, so people could read that while they're waiting for the V-Line and see that there is a local community transport option. So anything else, Alison?
We use similar mechanisms as listed there. I think the other thing is you've got to tell the story. So there's new people that come in and go, oh, is there a bus? Oh, what's that? And as I said before, being really clear about what it is and what it isn't. So you're not dealing with people's expectation, disappointing people, and we cannot be everything to everyone. We cannot do everything. So I guess clarifying that all the time, and but certainly promotion.
All right, thanks, Alison. I just want to say I've got my Friend of Sunny sticker on my car here in Melbourne, so
Great.
do my little bit for you.
We were lucky we had a really great graphic designer who'd done all of our graphics for our energy project journey for the last 5 years or so. So you can see that, like, community energy e-bus. So it's very much linked to the energy work that both communities have been doing for a long time. So
great. Thanks, Alison. Frank, do you have a quick comment on the types?
Just that really we decided not to put any conditions on what people book the bus for. It was open to all comers. If somebody just wanted to put a group together to go to a social function, a movie, it didn't matter what it was for. If we had a driver and the bus was available, it was available. And that model has worked very well. But as Alison said, you can't be all things to all people. You can't take a group to Melbourne for the day, for instance. That's just not going to happen. Although in a special circumstance, we might even do that as well, because we've found AC charges that we might be able to use. But that would be a very difficult one to do. It's all within the sort of local zone, our local range zone, you might call it. But all of those things that are listed there and more are catered for.
Perfect.
So I'll just quickly detail what we do. So we do some scheduled trips, so weekly trips and fortnightly trips into, like, shopping areas, appointments, library, all of that sort of stuff. So they're regular. Then we do V-Line connections. So by arrangement, we do the private booking, so the social outings, if you will. So you want to go, I don't know, down to the prom for the day, book the bus in that way, and then we coordinate some social outings. So to either go to a local event or something like that, sightseeing, community engagement, and we run a free community summer beach shuttle service, and we've been actually doing that for 13 years to help transport people safely to the Patrol Beach in Venus Bay. So that's the main things that we do.
Thank you.
We don't do the pub thing because we've got local pubs got a what's it called?
Courtesy bus.
Courtesy bus.
Fantastic. So we've already reflected a bit on electric vehicles, but the communities, based on their experience, just wanted to share a little bit of information, things you might like to consider if you're wondering if any of these right for you. Over to you. Who's going to talk from Sandy Point?
Yes, well, I've covered a bit of this already. Running costs is certainly a lot lower than an internal combustion engine, particularly now. The EVs are quieter. The particular bus we had was really the only game in town at the time, but there are other options available now, and any communities considering electric buses must get DC charging capability. This particular vehicle was delivered in China with DC charging, but not in Australia. We only got AC, and that limits the charging speed and also the number of places you can go to. So you really got to get DC charging capability. And then you can charge, fully in 20 minutes at an appropriate supercharger. So that's the fundamental difference. We run within our range. Sometimes we have to come back to home base to top it up again if we're doing multiple trips in a day. Typically, we've got a range of 250 to 300 kilometres, and that's certainly enough for our community, except we might have 4 or 5 trips and we do have to top up sometimes. But in terms of charging stations, they're everywhere nowadays. The DC charging stations are all over the place. So there's an app that you can get on your phone called PlugShare, and that tells you where they are. And many vehicles will also tell you that if you're going to that place, you should charge on the way there, for instance, if it's a long trip, so there's a lot of help, and people who are worried about range really don't need to do that. Range anxiety, once you've got one of these things, is really not a big deal unless you're going, sort of beyond the sort of typical range of the bus, and then you'll need to look for a charging point. Okay, there's more to talk about there, but I won't go into any more detail.
Thanks, Frank.
The other thing I would just add that, and we didn't do this, and I don't know even why you would. We didn't think of it because the buses were based in Brisbane. I would make sure you go and test drive them.
Yes.
Because these vehicles, they're very high to get in. So if you're a shorter person or you've got some mobility issues, it's very
awkward.
That's a really good comment, Alison. Just
and it's all so we've had different issues with our bus, exactly the same bus, but so in terms of the cost, we've had a lot more things go wrong with our vehicle. So it depends, doesn't it? So even though the running costs ideally should be minimal, it depends on the vehicle.
All right. So I think we've come
Jackie,
to the...
Hi.
Sorry, did you have a comment?
Just very quickly, from a booking officer's perspective, please be aware that sometimes we get lots of bookings in the one day, and that can bring up the issue of range anxiety. It's one thing to book it, but it's another thing to get all that delivery in one hit.
Good comment, Neil. Thank you. I can see that we have got quite a few questions coming through. I'm going to hand over to our research speakers just to quickly give you a little bit of a sense of what the research project was about, because it'll give you some context, and then we'll dive into the Q&A. So I'd like to hand over to Magda Spilovic. Did I say that right, Magda? I've been practicing. So to give you a bit more information about the project, and Diana Heatherich, manager at the Centre for Technology and Fusion at Trobe University. So take it away.
Hi everyone, my name is Magda. I'm a sociologist and community studies researcher, and I led the research design and evaluation of this project. I'll just briefly talk about what we did and what we found, as it's not easy to capture 2 years project, but you can find more in the report. So the goal of this project was to understand whether a community-led transport model can work in places where there's no public transport, and what it actually takes to make it viable. So this pilot gave us a strong case to explore how this model works. Venice Bay and Sandy Point are small towns with no public transport and very, very limited alternatives, where access to healthcare, shops, and services is a real challenge. Over 2 years, we examined how the service worked in practice, using surveys, interviews, and operational data. We looked at social, economic, and environmental outcomes, with social impacts clearly being the strongest. The service reduced social isolation, improved well-being and community connection, while also supporting participation, reducing travel costs, and showing that low-emission transport can work in small, remote communities. At the same time, the pilot also highlighted some key challenges. These include reliance on volunteers, the burden of coordination, and the limitation of current funding models. We also looked at other case studies both in Australia and internationally, and they show very similar patterns. In rural and low-density areas, transport services rarely achieve commercial viability. Patronage is usually modest, even when services are highly valued. What matters is not volume, but what the service enables, such as access to healthcare, social participation, and independence. And I can tell that there's been already some questions about the numbers. So I think this is really important because this points to a broader insight from the research. Community transport is not just a service, but part of social infrastructure, supporting access, inclusion, and everyday life in regional communities. What this shows is that there are limits to applying conventional transport thinking to service like this. And if we evaluate them based on patronage or commercial viability, they will always appear marginal. But if we evaluate them based on social value, inclusion, well-being, and access, they become essential. And that has important implications. One of the main contributions of this report is to move beyond the question of does it work to what conditions are needed for it to work elsewhere. At a higher level, the recommendations focus on a few key areas. First, recognizing community transport as part of the broader mobility system, not just a welfare service. And I think this is particularly important in Australia, where it seems community transport doesn't have, it's not recognized, ironically, as a part of transport system. It obviously varies from state to state. Second, supporting place-based models where services are designed around local capacity rather than imposed as standard solution. And third, funding needs to reflect reality. So rural transport will not be commercially viable. So funding should be based on social value, not patronage. We also highlight the need for simple tools to support booking and coordination and stronger integration with existing transport systems. So I think the most important thing to take away from this is that this is not just a transport solution. It is a way of providing access, connection, and care in places where conventional systems don't work. I will stop here and hand over to Diana, who will talk about how these insights have been translated into practical toolkit for communities.
Sorry, just unmuting my toolkit. Yeah. Thank you, Magda, and good afternoon, everyone. As you know, my name is Diana Heatherich, and I'm also from La Trobe University. I supported the project team members and communities throughout the journey, and very early on, I started to get a sense that other groups curious about the project were eager for resources they could use. We had many different community groups around Australia reach out to the communities independently, and the key thing that came through was, how do you do it? So the seed was planted and the toolkit was developed by listening to and working with both communities over the life of the project. And I want to call out the work of the local engagement officers who did a lot of this, the initial things, and then checked what I put together at the end to say, yeah, that makes sense. So thank you to them. The document titled Guide for Organisations, I think, is the best place to start in the toolkit. It was written to share what was learnt along the way, and I've seen a lot of the questions that have come through, and a lot of those questions, I think you'll find more answers in this guide for organisations. So we wanted to document the many pain points that the communities had, and how we ironed them out. And I wanted to cover that in the toolkit. Now, you've heard some of those pain points already, and thanks to both communities being fully committed to the idea of providing these resources and tools to help other communities not experience as much pain, here we are today with this downloadable zip file. And as I recall in the early days of the project, and Alison said as well earlier in this webinar, I know they would have loved anything to use as a starting point. Now, to be clear, the toolkit is not a set of instructions like an IKEA flat pack to build a piece of furniture where there is only one way to achieve a successful outcome. Rather, it tells the story of many of the actions the communities took and found worked in their unique situations. As you've heard today, we also found each community was different in the way they organised and approached how they would deliver the service for their residents and visitors. So what worked well in one community was not necessarily the best way for the other community. So consider this toolkit as a starting point to get you to think about what you want, why you want it, who will it be for, how will it work. Understanding these key questions, as mentioned already by the communities earlier, we hope will then guide you as to what you need to use from the toolkit and adapt for your unique situation. Also, once you implement something, don't be surprised if you need to tweak and adapt in response to how your communities respond. It's a bit like cooking. You might try a recipe, but find you need to tweak and adapt because you don't have a food processor that finally chops your ingredients, or you forgot to buy an ingredient. I do that all the time. So you try to find something similar in your pantry to replace it, or your oven behaves differently to how the oven in the cookbook says it should work. Although we would love to say, yes, the toolkit will provide all the answers, I'm sure that if you choose to start a service, you will still experience your own issues, but hopefully what we have created will make it just that bit easier for you. The templates are plain, and some have said boring. This was deliberate. Why? We observe varying levels of skills in each community, and we didn't want to overwhelm volunteers with complicated things. We wanted to provide the bare structure that would easily be implemented using Word or Excel, which we found most people are capable of using. Of course, if you have volunteers with design skills, like Sandy Point had, or know how to make use of Canva and other emerging online tools to make them work differently, definitely make use of them. But our templates are simply something to start from, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel, and make it as easy as possible for volunteers who we found were often required to record activity for compliance purposes, like the checks of the vehicle. We found many volunteers much preferred using paper and pen, although we did create and trial online fillable forms. They weren't always met with enthusiasm or used with any enthusiasm. And we have to remember that connectivity in rural areas can be patchy, so that makes it difficult too. One last point, the order of documents listed in the toolkit shouldn't imply the sequence to progress through. They are listed in alphabetical order, just for easy locating when needed. My biggest hope is that the toolkit resonates with other groups looking to start a service and provide some reassurance that yes, like the communities of Venus Bay and Sandy Point, you too can do this. We'd love to hear from you about your experiences using the guide and toolkit in setting up your own community transport. All feedback is useful, and if we need to update the guide, we will. I've got some links that we'll put into the chat, but I don't think you'll get them, so I think maybe afterwards Jackie will send an email around with the links. Thank you again for your interest in this project, which we really hope has lasting impact for others around Australia. Thanks.
Thanks, Diana. That's really fantastic. And I think we appreciate the huge amount of effort and additional effort that you and Magda have put in time and time again. And the focus.
I'm just going to chime in and say Diana's been an absolute legend on the end of the phone. All the project team have been fantastic, but so how many conversations have we had, Diana? It was like, oh my God. So yeah, that support from iMove, from La Trobe and from the Department of Transport really been so important to this project.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Alison. I it's time for a few questions. So we have been answering a lot as we've gone along. I think I can see 28 answered questions. So if you haven't had a chance yet, pop into the Q&A and look at the ones that have been answered. The answers should be available to you. We can download those and send them as part of the webinar wrap-up as well. So that will be a resource for you along with everything else. But while I've got Magda and Diana from their session, just a quick question from Daniel in the Q&A, and he was asking if you looked at any case studies, best practice approaches to support the project. So Magda, maybe that's your department.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, of course, we look at all the case studies in Australia and internationally. This project turned to be quite unique because we haven't really found like a pilot, this type of project that also involves electric buses, because it's quite a new technology. And when I say this model focus on really volunteers, because obviously there's been some trials around in Europe, Scandinavia and China, but usually really run by the government. So there's a lot of community transport initiatives in Australia and also in the UK. But yeah, this was, I guess, especially in the sense that it's really involves electric buses and communities that are quite isolated.
Yep. Thanks, Magda. And I'm going to invite, I think we've still got Richard and Harvey with us there. If you wanted to pop your cameras on so that we've got the full panel available for questions. I can see there's been a few questions come through and that have been answered about, what does the money look like at the start? Where's the seed funding come from? How much is it? Those kind of things. We can only really talk from a Victorian perspective in terms of the government grant side of things, but maybe in this instance, Richard and all the communities, did you want to talk a little bit about the start of the project and the kind of grants that are, we already talked about flexible transport, but in terms of costs?
Look, having a first crack at that. Typically, when we talk to community organisations looking at a community transport service, you've obviously got the vehicle costs, and sometimes we encourage them to look at a really good second-hand vehicle that can reduce the costs. So, and whether it's a car or a bus, buses typically, second-hand might be 50,000, could go up to 100. I think these electric vehicles were a little bit over 100,000. For a typical community transport service run by volunteers, it might be $20,000 a year. Maintenance, fuel, and telecommunications, insurances. That's sort of the typical model. In terms of how that's where the funding comes from, we've seen some really innovative models across Victoria. One community's got a wind farm where they've managed to negotiate to get proceeds from the wind farm to the royalties that they pay out to offset it. Others do charters. Molen's got a really good one where they do wine tours. Others run opportunity shops. So there's just some examples. Obviously, organisations like the Bendigo Bank. But in terms of these two community groups, I'll hand over to Alison and others to comment on.
So part of ours is the donations, suggested donations for the trip. So the trip booking, we were successful in a small grant from the Bendigo Community Bank. So that helped us to pay for the insurance. So the insurance for the buses was $5,500 a year. We managed to bring that down to about $2,800 through a broker. So they're sort of big chunky costs. We've got a Friends of Sunny campaign, so people that really like the idea of the service that perhaps won't use it themselves are able to make a donation, and then we've done a couple of like fundraiser type things. So we're certainly much less financially well off than Sandy Point. They have a different a donation fare structure.
I can just add some figures to that if you like. Our budget for the running costs of the buses is around about $10,000 a year, covering the insurance, registration, the power. We get our electricity costs subsidised through our men's shed. Because the project started with them, we helped, or we put in an EV charger as part of a project at the men's shed, and we get a subsidised power from that. Insurance, as Alison mentioned, we've managed a reasonable reduction in that. We also managed to get a Bendigo Bank grant, and we've also had some sponsorships through Marinus Link, who are active very close to our local community. We're hoping to hit them for a little bit more and support into the future. But and the donation model seems to be working reasonably well. We've got a reasonable size nesting now, and are covering our costs.
I will just add that all of that that you mentioned before, Richard, like running an op shop or doing charter trips, it all adds to the volunteer load. Even applying for grants all takes time and resources. So that's something else to keep in mind, to have to keep working on that financial sustainability modelling.
Yeah, thanks, Alison.
Jackie, if I could too, just add to that from a regional perspective. Certainly when we look at the bus funding up front, it's different models we don't have a set model, say you have to put this in, we will provide that amount. We look at each case on its merits, Richard was saying, and I have, whilst I'm in Gippsland here, I have counterparts across regional Victoria. So really the first thing that anybody that's thinking of doing this and wants to talk about it to the department about possible funding and that, I advise them to either contact myself or contact one of my peers, and I'm happy to give their names out and just see whether the model fits and how much we could. And we do it in a partnership. It's not we're going to do everything or you're going to do everything. We work out what suits the particular circumstance, because it might be something that's very small, like Richard said. Sometimes we've done cars, sometimes it's buses, it might be EVs, but this is the first EV, so we've certainly done a lot of other ones that are not as costly in the initial stage. Whether they turn out to be later, we'll see. But so I think the first step is, if you want to know about funding and what the department can offer, is to have a discussion.
Thanks, Harvey. Alison.
Adding to that, so the funding story is one story, but you have to know what your community wants and needs. And I think one of the earlier slides was, sort of a demonstrated need. So we thought we knew what our community wanted and needed, and we did to a point, but, that thing about engaging with the community. So we had various forums about, everyone's really excited and, what do you think we should be doing? And everyone's going, oh yeah, just shuttle around Venus Bay and everyone will get onto that. It's like, okay, right, we'll try that. Well, that didn't work. So it's that thing of you should do that. Whereas what actually the need is to get in to do your shopping sort of thing. So having an understanding about, so really nutting that stuff out alongside the funding question as well. What can you afford?
Yeah, good point, Alison. Paul has put a question through around how community transport or this type of project relates to other elements of community transport. I think, Diana, you're in the process of answering it. Or does anyone want to, so we've got aged care, we've got NDIS regulations. Does anyone just want to comment on that question about how they relate to each other? Because my feeling is this was quite a...
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, we can't actually carry somebody from an aged care facility if it's booked by the facility. But booked by the aged care person themselves is a different matter, and we can. So there's kind of that little issue. There's also the Royal Flying Doctor Service. They have a bus service in Foster, and that's specifically for health-related needs. We don't cross paths with them. That's their own particular service. Is there any other ones, Phil, that you can think of? Other transport services that we don't...
Not really. I guess there were some commercial taxi services around. We been at pains to try and make sure that we don't compete with their business.
Yeah.
The sorts of trips that we offer are ones that they really can't fulfil. That's one other minor concern, perhaps.
So just some other comments, I suppose, about the community transport sector. The larger operators, I guess, are able to tap into the funding from the My Aged Care program and NDIS, which comes with quite a lot of rules and regulations, and the Commonwealth provide that funding. Unfortunately, it's difficult for the neighbourhood houses and small community groups who want to do a service to be able to have the resources to tap into it. So that's sort of where the Victorian Government, through the Flexible Local Transport Solutions program, is sort of able to plug the gap and potentially fund a vehicle or do a trial for the service. But typically the sector is funded through Commonwealth program, but on a much larger scale. But even they struggle. They're very much tied to volunteers as well. It's a tricky sector.
Thanks, Richard. I had a few questions come through with the registrations, and a lot of really good questions, actually. We're not going to have time for all of them, but just a question to any of the panelists that want to respond. In your view, what type of consultation with community is recommended to inform place-based use of the toolkit, and a recommended method of collecting feedback to ensure services are keeping up with community need? Would anyone like to respond?
I think in the start, going through those existing and trusted organisations. So in Venus Bay, for example, the Venus Bay Community Centre is one of them, but liaising with those other organisations. And as I mentioned earlier, people like to tell you what they think other people, it'd be really good for. So walking that line between what people think it should be and what it needs is addressing. In terms of all that data collection, I hate that stuff, but it does help. But, certainly things like community forums and, gauging interests and getting some really early key volunteerism happening. So, an action group or something like that to start progressing it. Right?
Yeah, I'm with Alison on this. I mean, the data collection is just another load on volunteers' scant resources. But we are, as Phil said, reporting every week on the trips we've done and the hours spent by volunteers. Phil, have you got anything to add to the sort of
It was
gathering
beforehand,
information?
wasn't it? The question was, how do you work out what service you want to need?
Yeah. What?
No, I do recall in those very early days, we did engage with all of with a majority of the community groups here to try and gauge how they might perceive the bus being used. We had mixed response. There were fortunately, some positive ideas, but maybe not quite as many as we perhaps had hoped we would have got.
Yeah, we thought we could have representatives from every community group in Sandy Point on the bus committee. It didn't turn out that way. They were just too busy with their own things, and we ended up sort of cobbling together our own group of people. And the actual shape of our transport is quite different from what we probably originally thought. We thought it would be only for connecting with V-Line, for instance, or something like that. But it was much broader than that, and there's a lot of social transport involved here that we never anticipated. Wouldn't that be fair to say, Phil?
Yes, absolutely. I can remember sitting with an empty bus on our first scheduled trip for a shopping trip and waiting for passengers, and that never turned up. So, but maybe there's more incentive to do that these days. So
I was just going to say, I think we will find these electric vehicles might really be more utilised for that kind of stuff with petrol prices. And it just shows the differences between the two communities, and every single community is going to be different in it.
Neil?
I'd like to just reflect for a second that there's all of this activity produces an absolutely wonderful sense of achievement. We really feel strong about that. I mean, this is the motivation factor, and it is just a joy to be able to deliver something like this and to get public feedback. You should read some of it. It's just phenomenal.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I have to add here that Neil has gone out in his own private vehicle to pick somebody up when the bus was just not able to do that job. You know, amazing level of volunteer commitment to do that, you know.
Well, I think we'll have a special webinar just for Neil's stories, Frank.
Yeah.
Frank didn't point out that my four-wheel drive is on standby if the bus ever runs out of juice.
Oh, that's brilliant. Well, look, we're coming towards the end. It's been an hour and a half and it's gone really fast because that's just been so much information, but we will be providing follow-up information to everyone who's been on the call. I would like to really just invite any of our panelists really just to reflect on one or two things that you think it's really important to get right when you're trying to implement a project of this nature. I'm not going to force you all to respond to that, but whoever wants to have a bash, then the floor is yours.
Oh, Jackie, I'll go first, and I think, and it's really what the Sandy Point and Venus Bay communities do. I mean, there's a limit to what the Department of Transport and Planning can do, but if you've got enthusiastic people, so I think, you know, we had enthusiastic people to start with. If you start with no enthusiastic people and you've got to drag it along, then you really have an issue. So it really is a partnership. And if you've got people committed to that, then I think you'll overcome some of the other things.
Great.
I would agree with that. And I think that partnership enables communities to drive their own transport solutions, which is a lovely catch cry, because it's like a trust model. It's a collaborative model. It's like, okay, we can't do this. You can. Let's work together to work out how we can make this work.
Great. Anyone else?
And vehicle selection.
Oh, yeah. Definitely that.
I would say one of the really key functions, and we've mentioned this already, is the booking side of it, to match the booking with the driver. That's a fair administrative activity. Neil's perfected this, but still takes a bit of his time, and sometimes he's not available, but he can hand it over to somebody else to do that. So you need a group there of 3-4 people who can handle this without it being too onerous for anyone, you know. So that's a real critical function.
Beautiful. Anyone else? I think they're really good reflections. And I just want to say that we have, I mentioned it at the start, but we have some wonderful videos and information around this project. I'd like to do a shout out to Mike at Two Roads Films who did the videos. And if you ever want a video doing, oh my goodness, I've never met anyone so dedicated and technically able to tell a great story. So so thank you, Mike, for doing those. All on the iMove website and ready to go. The final report is there. That's got all the data on that in it, and the recommendations that Magda and Diana were talking about. The toolkit is there. So these wonderful people from Gippsland have basically been through this process for you to make this available to you. So I encourage you to go onto the iMove website and have a look. So with that in mind, I would like to thank all of our speakers and panelists today. I thought it was an amazing webinar. Did not think at some point that we were going to get through it all, to be perfectly honest. It was starting to look like there was a lot of information there, but we did, and we will share responses with you. So I'd like to thank you for coming today. Thank you, all the panelists, and we look forward to seeing you on an iMove webinar soon. So thank you very much. Great work,
Thank you,
everybody.
Jackie.
Thank you.
Well done, Jack.
Bye-bye.